Action.
This is the SUV and wagon collision project by Karmoni, Desman, and Chinonso. Okay, so right here, this is the sketch of the scene of the traffic incident, and these are the SUV skid marks. This is where the collision actually happened, and then this is the wagon skid marks. And the SUV skid marks only went 2 meters, while the wagon skid marks went 24 meters. And the reason for that is because the SUV had a greater velocity coming into the crash, and the wagon was at rest, so they had a greater distance to go because of being at rest, and they didn't have momentum to start with.
Alright, using this formula, that formula there, we calculated the velocity of the SUV and the wagon immediately following the collision. The velocity of the SUV was 2.8289 meters per second, and the velocity of the wagon was 12 meters per second. Next, we calculated the speed of both cars before the collision using the law of conservation of energy. Using this process, we found out that the speed of the SUV before the collision was 10.8284 meters per second, and the speed of the wagon before the collision was 0 meters per second since it was at rest. Finally, to determine the type of collision in the accident, we used the kinetic energy formula. Before the collision, there was 175,889.383698 joules of total kinetic energy. After the collision, there was 155,999.7698 joules of total kinetic energy. Since the total kinetic energy before the collision didn't equal the total kinetic energy after the collision was inelastic.
This graph represents the work energy diagram of the SUV and wagon during the collision. While this graph right here represents the velocity time graph, where the green dot right here represents the time of the impact, but this blue dot represents the velocity after the cars collided, which is obviously showing them decreasing. Go.
In conclusion, for the SUV collision, as you can see there, the kinetic energy is high with no potential energy. The work is negative because of the collision, and it resulted in a less kinetic energy but still no potential energy. For the wagon collision, there was no kinetic or potential energy in the beginning because it was at rest. The work was positive because of the SUV colliding with the SUV, and it resulted in higher kinetic energy and still no potential energy.
Okay, so finally, the SUV was at fault because they hit the wagon when he was stationed at the red light, and they were speeding and they weren't following the traffic laws, which were
well, the SUV broke 2 obvious traffic laws. Speeding, it was speeding about 5 kilometers over the speed limit, and for running a red light. Possibly it could have been following too closely or distracted, like texting while driving.
This report was completed by Karmoni, Desman, and Chinonso.